Guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my Worlds 2023 Play-Ins Day 4 overview and analysis video. Very excited to get into this because by the end of this episode, we will officially know the first two teams that are eliminated from Worlds 2023. So, some very big games coming up. It's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, one on Bracket A, one on Bracket B. We will also know two teams that are moving on to potentially get an opportunity to play for a best-of-5 chance, which I know is a kind of a consolation prize, but staying alive at, Worlds is still a pretty big deal and something that I think both of these, series and all four of these teams are definitely going to be invested in. Of course, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What did you think was going to happen in these series? Of course, I gave my thoughts on yesterday's video when we talked about the Day 3 games. I kind of previewed this at the end. We'll kind of go over what I thought of each series before we get into them, but would love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Of course, if you find yourself at any point throughout this video enjoying it and saying, I'm really liking what I'm seeing, I really would appreciate it if you hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. It does help in the algorithm a ton, and of course, if you are enjoying the content that we're putting out at Worlds this year every single day, then hit subscribe so you can be there for every single day's videos. But enough of the shilling, enough of the intro. Let's get right into the analysis. Let's go ahead and jump in to Bracket A. That's, of course, where we're going to start off because that's where the game started off. It was the first series, and it was a matchup between the number 1 seed from the VCS in GAM Esports and the number 1 seed from the LLA in Movistar R7. Very intriguing matchup on paper. First of all, this is not the first time that these two teams in particular have played against each other this year. Remember, I know they brought this up on broadcast a ton, but they played at MSI. They faced off at MSI, and R7 picked up the first ever international best of win for the LLA, which was obviously a huge accomplishment, and I would argue that R7 has only gotten better since then. I was really high on this team going into MSI because I really liked Mireyu and Seo as a carry duo in the mid and in the bot lane. And I felt like the rest of the team around them was good enough to be able to do something, and R7, I think, even overperformed my expectations at MSI, and I, adjusted accordingly. I put them pretty high in my rankings here. They weren't even bottom 3. I think that they were above a lot of other teams that people like. I mean, they were above Team Wales, who is now in the best-of-5 stage, and so I had a lot of confidence in R7 going into this tournament, and while that first series against PSG wasn't exactly what you wanted to see from them, PSG, I think, has proven that they're probably the best team in the play-ins, or certainly the most consistent team in the play-ins, and I think, stylistically, it's just very difficult for a team like R7 that relies a ton on momentum to go into a team like PSG, who's just very good at taking away momentum from enemy teams, and so I'm not out on R7 by any means, but some of the players on the team didn't exactly play well in that series, most specifically Adi in the jungle, who was massive for this team domestically in the playoffs. He was the most important player towards what they wanted to do. Now, I still think Seo can step up and be a really solid player because he was awesome domestically, and I think he's one of the few AD carries in the play-in stage that I was really hyped about going into this tournament, but Mireyu is a very mechanically talented player that just sometimes doesn't respect his opponents. He's also very assassin-heavy in terms of how he likes to play the game, which is very much not the meta. Talia, Orianna, Syndra, these picks have kind of risen in popularity and kind of become the norm, and it's not really the style that he likes to play, so going to be interesting to see, but R7's very talented, and they're going into a talented team in their own right, in GAM, who of course lost that series at MSI. However, this is a very different team. Topside is the same, Kiaya, Levi, Kati, they were on that team, but Slater and Pallet have entered as the bot lane, and I think they've been obviously a domestic upgrade by a pretty large margin over what they had in the spring split, and, whether or not that's going to be able to translate international, I think is a question, because let's face it, they were a problem in that first series. Loud decimated the bot lane matchup. Root was fantastic in that series, so was Seos, and GAM didn't really have an easy answer to that, and it's not entirely, unpredictable that Slater and Pallet would struggle internationally, because they got away with a lot domestically. Slater is one of the most aggressive, feast or famine AD carries that I've seen in a long time. You just don't see that playstyle out of AD carries anymore. Typically speaking, you have at least some restraint as an AD carry. You just aren't able to get away with putting yourself in really dangerous positions consistently as that role with a lot of the champions that are really popular in the game right now, but Slater has been doing that very consistently over the course of this year. It allows him to do mega damage in a lot of these team fights, but good teams are going to be able to take advantage of that, and they're going to be able to pounce, especially in the laning phases, which is what we saw Loud do Slater's really never had to play from a deficit. He's been really good, but he's just been better than everybody else he's played against in lane, and so it was interesting to see them have to play from behind. They struggled a lot, and I'm low on Pallet. I've talked about that considerably on this channel as well. I had him as my lowest ranked support coming into the tournament, and I've certainly not seen anything in the 2 games that they played that has changed my mind on that at all. I just don't think he has the upside to be like a super interesting player at this level, but if bot lane can be stable, like top side's awesome. Kiaya is still probably the best top laner in the play-in stage in all the teams, right? Kiaya carries harder than almost anybody else here. Obviously, Levy and Kati are great, and Kati in particular I think is someone that I'm, super in on, and so I think GAM has the talent to be able to win this series, but I predicted R7 to be able to take it because I just like their consistency a tad bit more, and I'm very worried about the GAM bot lane. I did say it was closer to a 50-50 than it was like one team dominating, but I felt pretty good about my R7 prediction. Let's go ahead and see if that upset comes true. Of course, if you're new here, what we're going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game in each series, and at the end of each series, I'll kind of tie everything into a nice little bow with a player of the series. But of course, if we are going to go game by game, that means we get to start it off with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was GAM Esports. They are going to take the first game of the series. They're going to go up 1-0, and this was a really good game from GAM. I think that R7 kind of showed their big flaws in this one, and the big reasons why you would be concerned with this team in terms of the lack of flexibility that they have, not only in draft, but in terms of gameplay style, and I really do think it came back to bite them pretty heavily in this one. We'll get into R7 in a bit, but GAM did everything they needed to do after the early game to really kind of snowball the game out of control. I think they individually played a lot better than their counterparts on the R7 side, and I think they looked a lot more stable, which is really just what you're looking for with GAM. We know that they have the talent, and even in that series against Loud in round number 1, they looked like they were talented enough to be able to take some games. The problem was that their weak points were just a little bit too exploitable for them to be able to win. I think what they really did was shore up a lot of those weak points, give me a bit more confidence that they're going to be fine in certain parts of the map, and, really show that they can be a team that can, make some noise. And I really like to see that. If they play like this, it's going to be a pretty easy series for them. But player of the game for me in game 1, at the very least, is going to go to Kati in the mid lane on the Syndra. Love the Syndra pick on R5. I don't, really want to go super in-depth on draft because as much as I love draft and I feel like I'm pretty good at analyzing it, I just don't think it's going to be super influential in this series if R7 is going to play like this. That being said, blind pick Sylas on B5 is just not it. Like, that is just never the answer. We talked about it. Mirayu's champion pool is kind of predictable. We see the Akali banned out. Things like the Nico, the Ahri, the playmakers are taken away, and a lot of the control mages are left up on the board. A lot of the more safe options are left up on the board, but Mirayu opts into a blind pick Sylas for, I guess, potentially to get Rakan ult or to get Wukong ult. I get the idea behind it, but Sylas is one of those champions that really is super counterable, and he does get countered. Syndra is a really good matchup into Sylas, and Kati takes advantage of that. Kati's actually in a bad position early, gets set behind by a really good gank coming in from Adi, but he's so much stronger as a champion in that matchup. Like, Syndra is so good into Sylas that he ends up getting a solo kill in lane anyways, and then from that point onwards, it's just, like, out of control. Kati plays fantastic the rest of the game, and it's really impressive to see the mid laner for GAM step up when they need him to. I talked about mid lane being a position of strength for the VCS as a whole, with him and Glory at this tournament being better, I think, than most mid laners, even from the West. I think that they're both incredibly talented players, and I think Kati has showed up. At least in this game, he was awesome on the Syndra, and if he's going to play like that, it's going to be huge for them. But big draft advantage there. I think obviously getting Xayah Rakan on R1, R2 is a positive, and Slater, credit to him, played significantly safer in this game. He really didn't give over a lot of weaknesses, and wasn't somebody that, GAM played for. It wasn't somebody that received a ton of attention on the side of his own team, but also, wasn't a negative factor, and that is more than enough to be able to get to the mid game as Xayah and start taking over a lot of these fights. This was an awesome game 1 from Slater. This is everything you would have wanted to see from him in the previous series. I think if he can do this in game 2, GAM's going to be fine. Pallet was fine on the Rakan, a couple of individual misplays, but I do think he was super great towards the back half of the games. A lot of the team fights, I think, were really positive from him. And then you've got Kiaya and Levy that were both positive as well. Surprised to see the Wukong come out here, but in general, I think the comp from GAM really set them up to be able to dominate so long as they didn't just completely throw away the mid game, and I think that's exactly what happened. They were able to win a lot of the isolated 1v1s, and their team fighting was fantastic, and that got them over the hump. And then for R7 on the other side, This was not a good game. This was not a good draft. This was not... just a lot not going well for them. They were able to get some early leads because of some good pathing and some good decisions and, getting Levy's flash early, but at the end of the day, like, they didn't do anything with any of the pressure that they were able to generate, and I understand why, because where do you win? Like, you counterpicked Gwen into Cassante, which everybody keeps telling me is a counter, and then I'm watching these matchups, and I'm watching Cassante 1v1 the Gwen as soon as he gets null magic, and, I'm like, okay, so what's the point of this? Is it just for the first, 4 levels of the game? Like, truly, I don't think Gwen is the answer into Cassante at the current moment. I truly don't believe that it's a counter pick. And I think we saw why in this game. We'll talk about Bong's mid-game when we get there, but, obviously blind pick Sylas getting countered by the Syndra, that's not good. Kai'Sa's really strong and obviously does a really good job of being able to capitalize when she does get online, but her one bad matchup really in the meta right now is Xayah, and that's kind of why Xayah has risen in popularity as the number 1 AD carry, and that's because she's more consistent than Kai'Sa, and we saw that again in this series. Where exactly are you supposed to generate your advantages? Because it really just doesn't feel like there are a lot of options on the side of R7, and that came into fruition. While Mireyu was making a lot of plays on the Sylas, he was getting a lot of kills, moving around the map, at least trying to be active. There just weren't a lot of plays to be made, and him losing isolated in the 1v1, even with this massive donation of gold into that mid lane, is a disaster for R7, and they lost a lot of pressure because of it. Done of the game is going to go to Bong. I don't think anybody is going to question this. This was not a good Gwen game. He did not look comfortable at all on this pick, but in general, again, I think Gwen is overrated as a counter to Cassante. I get the idea behind it, and I think in theory it makes sense, but the problem is Cassante is not the champion that everyone thinks he is in theory. He is way stronger than that. He does everything at a super high level, and so as soon as he starts to get some MR on him, all of a sudden that tank shred that Gwen offers isn't exactly there. It doesn't actually matter. He's still able to 1v1 her, and so that became a problem, and Kiaya was obviously just better in this game as well. Sayo and Lions were essentially irrelevant, and Audi was just way too inactive, especially in the mid-game. A lot of things to complain about on the side of R7, but I think a lot of it comes back to the idea that I think they were just way too greedy on blue side in this draft, feeling a little bit too confident in maybe the style that they can play. And I think that lack of flexibility is going to cost them if they continue to play like this. But obviously they still have another chance. It's a best of 3, so they can't afford to lose another game, but they do have another game to potentially play out here. It's going to be a big one for them. Is R7 going to be able to keep the series alive, or is GAM going to be able to close this out in a nice, clean sweep? Well, the winner of game number 2 was GAM. They are going to pick up game 2. They're going to make this series relatively quick. They are going to be moving on, and Movistar R7 will officially, I guess technically, be the first team to be eliminated from Worlds 2023. Golden Guardians technically didn't make Worlds. I know some people are probably going to talk about that, but that was a qualifying series by technicality, even though they played it in Korea. I'm not going to count them as the first team eliminated from Worlds. R7 is technically the first team eliminated, and it's a shame. They really didn't show up internationally. They were not the team that I think a lot of us saw domestically. I know I'm not the only one that was hyping up R7. The LLA looked like they had been on the rise in recent years, but unfortunately just didn't seem super sustainable. VCS, has started to peak. I would say started to kind of figure it out after a really bad showing on day 1 from GAM, and they looked good in this series. Let's talk about them first, because it's always good to talk about the winners first. Player of the game for me is going to go to Pallet in the support position. I thought he was really impactful on the rel. A lot of these engages were very important for this team. I think in general, I've been very harsh on Pallet. I think he can be a good player, and I think especially when things are going well for GAM, Pallet tends to look really good in the late game. I think that that's just generally, kind of a trend with some of the supports in the lower regions at this tournament, is that they're maybe a bit more consistent in terms of being able to capitalize on teamfight strengths. However, I do think that his early game weaknesses are still there. That being said, getting Xayah in both of these games is absolutely massive for GAM, because it gives Pallet the room to play a little bit more aggressive, because Slater can, kind of put himself into good positions just naturally with how that champion works and the good matchup that she specifically has into Kai'Sa, which R7 continuously opted into. Pallet, I think, played great. In general, you're looking at R7's comp, and you're seeing something that really needs to take advantage of a lot of these skirmishes in the mid game. You need Ahri to shove and roam in that mid lane matchup so she can get out on the map and work with Lee Sin to create a lot of havoc and chaos, but it just never really happened, and I think a lot of that was because of Pallet and how well he played in the mid game here. Certainly wasn't the only player to play well. I think Kati was awesome here. He's going to get my player of the series as a whole. Really liked what he did in both games on the Syndra. I think that champion is crazy consistent right now. I think a lot of people are hyping up Orianna, and it's for a good reason. I do think Ori is strong, but I think Syndra, in my opinion, is just as good at the current moment. I don't think they are identical, but I think Syndra offers, you know, a similar idea to what you want to get out of Ori, which is just a very stable, very consistent, you know, mage from game to game that's going to be really strong in the team fight stage. I just think Syndra has a little bit more lane prio than someone like Orianna does at the current moment. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm, you know, talking out of my ass a little bit, but I do like Syndra quite a bit, and I think Kati did show a lot of the strength of that champion in this series. I've been high on him. I talked about it in the previous game. I talked about why people should continue to look at, you know, Kati is one of the more interesting mid laners in the play-in stage, and I think he proved that here. Slater was, again, a bit more consistent. He got his pentakill in this game, which is obviously great, but there were quite a few moments in the mid game where I was like, you really should not be that far forward. It feels like GAM won a game, and all of a sudden Slater was like, oh, no, actually, I can go back to playing just as aggressive as I wanted to against Loud in the first place. And he did put himself into some bad positions because of it, but he was still doing a ridiculous amount of damage, right? There are going to be very few AD carries at this stage of the game that are going to do nearly as much damage as what Slater is doing because of just the way he plays the game. It is going to get him in some trouble, but for the most part, it was worth it, especially towards the back half here. Levy was awesome in this series. I think in general, his setups were fantastic. He's going to go underrated for how important he was towards what this team wanted to do. I think the Wukong was great. I think the Vi was great. Two champions that I think are relatively weak that he kind of dominated on. And then Kiaya was solid in the top lane. This is really kind of a weak side top lane performance coming out from Kiaya on the Jax, and I think that that's fine. Jax is a really good champion. I think he's one of the few champions that at least has an opportunity to be able to fight into the Cassante. It's a little bit more difficult when you have a Lee Sin on that side because, you know, ideally Audie's probably going to be spending a lot of time top. He didn't, but, you know, ideally he would be, and I think Kiaya did a fantastic job of being able to isolate that matchup and win the 1v1. So GAM doing everything they needed to do. They're going to be moving on now to face Loud once again for an opportunity to play a best of 5, and I think they're in much better form and they have a better grasp of where they're at and where their game plan is at than they did, you know, a couple of days ago before that series with Loud. If they can perform like they did here against R7, I think it's certainly going to be an interesting conversation. And then, unfortunately for R7, this is the end of the road. I think when you wrap up a season like this, it's got to be met with, again, positivity, which I know is crazy to say, but you made Worlds. Like, this team made Worlds. They won the first ever international best of 5 for the LLA at MSI. There's a lot to like about what this R7 team was able to do over the course of 2023. They just couldn't get the job done here at Worlds. Dud of the game for me is going to go to Seo. I was really high on him going into this tournament, but he just did not perform in the way that you would have wanted him to. He opted into the Kai'Sa into Xayah matchup, which, again, I just think is very weak for Kai'Sa. The reason that Xayah is going earlier in draft is because Xayah is very good into Kai'Sa and is also consistent in other matchups where Kai'Sa basically beats everybody else. I don't like the idea of continuously opting into that, especially if you're going to first pick Rakan and give over something like a Rel. I just don't think you're really ever going to be able to survive that, and Seo showed that off. He was really not very good in this game, and he wasn't very good at this tournament. But you could say the same thing about basically everybody on this team. Bong was consistently outclassed every single game in the top lane that they played. He did not have a single good game this tournament. Audie was very disappointing, which has very unfortunately kind of become a trend for him over the course of his international career. Mireyu has not been able to live up to the expectations. His champion pool is very limited, and I think the playstyle that he likes to employ is just not in season right now. It's not in meta, and it's unfortunate because he wasn't really able to do the things that he wanted to do, and Lions is just kind of fine as a support. R7 was never really able to get off the ground, and they looked like one of the bottom teams at this tournament. Again, it's unfortunate with how well they did domestically and how good a lot of these players looked in those circumstances for them to come to this tournament and not exactly be able to perform. But again, this is such a positive year for R7 and for the LLA. Hopefully they can build on what they were able to accomplish, and this org and, you know, that region as a whole can just continue to get better. But congratulations to GAM. They're going to be moving on, and we're now going to find out which team's going to be joining them from the other side of the bracket. And then moving on to our B side of the bracket, our second series that we are going to talk about in today's video. And this one I think is a little less interesting in terms of on-paper expectations. I think both of these teams are kind of clearly defined as either favorites or underdogs in this series in particular, and we'll go ahead and see if that table ends up getting turned. But it's a matchup between the number 4 seed from the LEC in Team BDS and the number 1 seed from the LJL in Detonation FocusMe. Obviously, BDS is going to come in here as a pretty major favorite. They are a major region team going against what I think me and a lot of people have claimed is the worst team at Worlds this year in DFM, who just are kind of the worst version of themselves at the current moment. This is a team and an org that has underperformed at, you know, recent international events after being able to get out of play-in stage in 2021. which was obviously a great overachievement from them. It's the height of what the LJL has been able to do internationally, but the last 2 years have just kind of been a downward trajectory from that moment, kind of leading to this. And you go into Worlds this year with a DFM team that I think a lot of people, even domestic fans of the LJL, weren't convinced was the best LJL team, with, the SoftBank Hawks, with Sengoku being really interesting kind of alternatives in the playoffs, and, DFM having a lot of problems, with Udapon playing top lane for the entirety of the playoffs and then role swapping back into the bot lane, them bringing in Appamen to play top lane, who hasn't played competitively in 2+ years. There were a lot of question marks about this DFM team, and certainly none of them went away when they got destroyed by CFO in round number 1, who really isn't that dominant of a team. I think DFM certainly has a lot of questions to answer. If there are upsides, then it's Udapon has played really well all year long in either role that he's played, either bot or top. He's been really good at both. He's been pretty dominant as a laner in both circumstances, and he's a very consistent late game carry, somebody that we know has been a really good player for a long time. Arya, I think, has found his form in the summer split. I was very concerned about him in spring. It felt like his confidence was really low after the KT roster year last year, where he ended up getting benched and replaced by Vikla, who was just a better player. But I think in summer, he's kind of gotten some of that confidence back. I think he feels better about his, style of gameplay, and I think he's played well, and Harp is a solid player, but the top side of the map is a concern. Appamen was a major problem in their first series. It looked like somebody who hadn't played competitive in 2 years, and Steel has just not been good this year. As much as I've liked Steel in previous years, somebody who I've hyped up quite a bit, the tape this year has just not been very good. This is easily one of the worst years of his career, and that's definitely a disappointing thing to say, and so DFM certainly has their own question marks. But we can't pretend like BDS is some perfect team either, right? Like, they're here for a reason. They lost their first series of Worlds, which is not what I think I and a lot of other people expected from them. They were the heavy favorites to come out as the best team in the play-in stage, but they end up losing to Team Wales, getting reverse swept in that best of 3, which is not ideal, and it does reveal some of the problems that this team has, some of the flaws that they showed in the summer split and in the season finals domestically in Europe, and that's that they rely a ton on their inconsistent players winning, Crownie and Labrov in particular. I like Crownie, I like Labrov, I think they're good players, and obviously they've shown, even on an international stage, that they can be good with that series against Golden Guardians to get here, but they were awful in that series against Wales. They were the biggest problem by far, in my opinion, that BDS had. Certainly not the only problem, but the most common one, in my opinion. Of course, Nuke also played really bad in that series down in the back half, especially in game number 2, and that's certainly something to monitor. I've been lower on Nuke basically for the entirety of his career, especially this year when people have really started to get high on him. I've just never seen the mechanical execution that would, make me want to put him near the top of the LEC mid laners, but, he's kind of been, growing and growing and growing on me as the year has gone on, and then he has a series like he did against Wales where, Glory is infinitely better than him down the stretch, and so it's certainly something to consider. That's not a huge upset. I predicted Glory to be the better mid laner going into this tournament, but Nuke's going to need a bounce-back series. Adam, the saving grace has been phenomenal, right? He's been fantastic. Over the course of the play-ins, he destroyed Golden Guardians. He was really good in game 1 that they won against Wales. He's kind of been the one that has won them all their international games, and Adam has been somebody that I've praised and talked about on this channel a lot over the course of this year. If he can continue to be good, that's going to be big. Shea was a solid player, and we know Crownie and Labrov have the potential to be a top 10 bot lane at this tournament as a whole, but they just need to execute on it. It's going to be big to see if they're going to be able to do that. But of course, now we get to start with game number 1. I'm taking BDS. That's the prediction. If I went for DFM, I'd be crazy in this matchup. This should not be close. BDS are major favorites, and they should be able to take it down as major favorites. But are they going to be able to do that? Well, the winner, at least in game number 1, was Team BDS. They are going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0, and this is kind of exactly what you were looking for from BDS in game number 1. This is the kind of performance that I think this team definitely needed to put in. They needed to be the better team by a considerable margin, and in my opinion, they definitely were in this one. They were fantastic from the early game to the end of the game, and I like their draft quite a bit. This is very much a Super K-Man Rocks draft, if you will, because these are a lot of the champions that I have hyped up a lot going into this tournament, and just over the course of this year. You've got the Ivern in the jungle, you've got the Jace in the mid lane, you've got the Braum in the support position. These are a lot of champions that I've talked about being, I don't want to say underrated, because I think people know they're good, but some of the best champions in their roles that aren't necessarily picked like the best champions in their roles, and I think BDS showed why in a game like this. Two contrasting styles in draft, BDS very much wanting to go for a more early game approach, with the Ivern trying to assist out the Jace and the Xayah and the Renekton and trying to generate a lot of pressure by just winning lanes early. And then DFM on the other side wanting to scale. Maokai and Syndra are very good in the late game. You draft that Kai'Sa specifically for the team fight stage of the game. DFM wants to survive and try to get to the late game relatively neutral. The problem with that is that BDS is the better team and they're the better players, and so if you give them advantageous matchups in the laning phase, it's actually going to be relatively difficult for them to survive that. The only lane that I think is survivable here is bot lane, and that's because I think that Alistar really is just a bit more active, and there really isn't going to be a lot of aggression coming out from Braum pre-6, which I think is really where Kai'Sa struggles the most. But I mean, outside of that, like, Jace is going to demolish Syndra early. That's kind of what Jace does. It's why I consider him the best mid laner in the game. I think Renekton's obviously very good into Aatrox. It's a pick that I think is just better in lane. It's a better version of Aatrox in lane, and then Aatrox is a better version of Renekton in teamfights. That's kind of just how it ends up going, but really, a lot of this comes back to the center point of the map and my player of the game, Nuke, on this Jace. I go back and forth on Nuke, man. For every bad game, there's a really, really good one, and he does have more good games than he has bad games, especially in recent weeks, and it's the reason I've really started to buy in on him more than I had over the course of the last few months. It's because I think the consistency has risen a lot for him, and he was really good even when this team was struggling down the stretch in the summer split and in the season finals, and I think this game was awesome from him. If you can play through Jace early, he's gonna reward you. This is the best early mid-game mid laner in the entire game right now. Maybe with the exception of, like, Tristana, but people really aren't even going for that right now. I know I got banned in this game, but we haven't seen a single game of Tristana, you know, actually played at this tournament so far, and I think Jace is, you know, just as good in a very similar position, and I think gives you a bit more flexibility, and I think Nuke went and showed that off. He dominated the laning phase. He got a ton of help from Sheo on this Ivern to be able to move around the map, and all of a sudden, this power spike of the mid game, where you're really looking at Jace and Xayah and Renekton and Ivern as these big skirmishers, even Braum as these big skirmishers, they're significantly harder to deal with if Jace has gold. We'll just say that. It's almost impossible to play into that, and DFM had to learn that the hard way. So credit to Nuke. I thought he played great. Credit to Sheo as well. I thought he was really good. Labrav was really good in this game on the Braum. I think both of them fulfilled similar roles of essentially just making sure that the damage dealers on this team had as easy of a job as possible, and I think they executed on that. Ivern's crazy strong right now, and I'm surprised to not see a lot of other teams going towards it. We know it's kind of an EU special. They're really the region that has brought it out the most over the course of the last few months when it has been good, but I would be surprised if other teams don't pick up on that and start to move towards it. Same thing with Braum, another champion that has been prioritized a lot more in the LEC than it has in other regions, but all Braum does is win. Like, all this champion does is allow for your really strong AD carry and mid combos to do whatever they want, to play as aggressive as they need to, and, you know, give them the avenue to be able to, you know, give that protection. Labrav is awesome at this champion, and I think Braum is another champ I would expect to either rise in popularity or be a great choice for the win rate champion at this tournament, because if he doesn't get played a ton, I think he's just going to win a lot. I think he's going to win most of his games, and so it's certainly going to be interesting. Adam was solid on the top side of Renekton, but they didn't play through him. They played through mid-bot, and that was the right play in this game, specifically the mid lane, which was really good. And then for DFM on the other side, that scaling comp just didn't end up working out. I get the idea of maybe wanting to survive against BDS and try to be able to team fight your way out of it, but you were just never going to be able to survive against this comp. You're giving over so much pressure in the early game that it's actually very difficult for me to see a world in which you go into that mid to late game, even remotely even, when you're already probably worse in the isolated 1v1s. I think in particular, Yutapon really disappointed me in this game. He's going to get my dud of the game on the Kai'Sa. I think you really need Kai'Sa to step up in this matchup. She is by far the most important piece in the entire game for either team, because if the Kai'Sa gets strong, all of a sudden BDS's job becomes significantly harder, because Kai'Sa actually outdamages everybody else on BDS. There is no one on that team that's going to be able to keep up in damage, even the Xayah. That's how good Kai'Sa is at the current moment. But if Kai'Sa doesn't get online, then DFM's comp doesn't really have a purpose, right? You're relying a ton on Syndra, who loses early to Jace, and that's not what you really want to see. Aatrox is never going to be able to take over here. You've got the Maokai and the Alistar to try to support that, and so Yutapon being the most important piece and having a really poor game here, I think is just unfortunate for DFM and LJL fans, because Yutapon's kind of been the rock for this team over the course of this year, and so for him to disappoint here, I think it's just not ideal. Of course, the rest of the team didn't exactly play great. Oppamen is still getting absolutely destroyed in lane. Like, he is just not good enough to be playing at this level, and that's become very abundant through his first 3 games at this tournament. And then Steel continues to struggle with pressure. Like, he continues to struggle with not only the early game, but knowing when to apply pressure in the early game. That's something that's super important right now. Early game aggression and tempo is more important than it's ever been in League over the course of 2023. And Steel just struggles a lot with that. He doesn't know when to play aggressive. He doesn't know when he can have backup from his teammates. It just doesn't feel like he has a great grasp of the meta. Harp and Arya were essentially non-factors in this game, specifically Arya, who just didn't really do anything after being out-roamed and outscaled by the Jace. I say outscaled in the sense that obviously Jace doesn't outscale Syndra, but Nuke was way more effective in the back half of this game than Arya because Nuke got so much done in the early game. DFM just felt outclassed, and this looked like the worst team at the tournament once again. They have to turn their fortunes around now. They are one game away from being 0-4'd out of this tournament, just like R7, but they look a lot worse doing it. They need to be able to find something to pick up a win here, but BDS obviously wants to close this out as quickly as possible. This is not a position they wanted to find themselves in the first place, and so I imagine they want to get out of it relatively quickly, but are they going to be able to do that in 2 games, or is DFM going to keep this series alive? Well, the winner of game number 2 was BDS. They are going to take game number 2. They're going to close out this series very quickly, both games under 30 minutes, and they're going to be moving on to take on CFO for a chance at a best of 5. We expected this. This is not some sort of upset outcome. Nobody is particularly surprised. I know usually I'm like, oh, what a great win. I'm so happy for this team. BDS would have been on major watch had they lost this. I mean, I think European fans might have actually tried to run them over with all of the vehicles that they have in the entirety of the continent if they would have lost this series, because it just would have been an absolute disaster. But BDS coming in, doing what they need to do, being the better team, being able to outclass them basically in both sides of a very similar coin. I'm not going to say that DFM stole the comp from game number 1 from BDS, but they played something very similar, or at least with a similar idea with a few more options for the late game, and BDS said, okay, I guess we'll take the late game, quote-unquote, scaling comp. We'll take this comp that's a little bit better down the stretch, and we will actually just win early anyways. It doesn't really matter. We're just better than you, and so it doesn't actually matter what we end up picking. And that ended up being the case here. I do like the draft from DFM. I think that it gives you options, but again, BDS is just so much better in terms of execution that it ends up not really mattering. Player of the game for me is going to go to Adam in the top lane. Felt like he was really good in this game, and I know his scoreline doesn't necessarily indicate it, but anybody who watched the tape, anybody who watched the game, knows just how much Adam dominated Oppamen and how this just was not a very fair matchup between somebody who is having what is, in my opinion, the best year of his career for Adam and Oppamen, who hasn't played competitively in 2 years. I do want to give credit to Oppamen for being able to step in, being able to, potentially try and play at Worlds as an emergency substitute, but he just was never going to be in a position where he could survive this kind of gameplay. Adam ends up getting that Jax matchup, which in my opinion is really bad. Like, the Poppy R5 is fantastic here from DFM. I think it does a really good job of basically shutting down everything that Jax wants to do, and I really don't think there's a lot that he's actually capable of doing isolated in the 1v1, or I wouldn't think that typically, but Jax ends up getting to the part of the game where he's able to just dominate anyways, and in fact, he won early, and so that's just how good Adam is, right? Or how much better Adam is, because I do really believe that's a bad matchup, so credit to him, he was great. I think Sheo was awesome in this series in general. I think Sheo's been very consistent for BDS. He's one of the players that I feel the most solidified on. I'm not sure he would be a player that would do as well if he was on a team with worse carries, because I don't think he really is a carry-style jungler, but I think as a facilitating-style jungler, he's going to be one of the most consistent that Europe has for many years to come. He's just shown that kind of playstyle. Think of him very similarly, kind of in an opposite playstyle way to someone like Marcoon. I think they're going to be very similar in terms of their career trajectories, but Sheo continues to be great. Player of the series for me, though, is going to go to Nuke in the mid lane. I know the scoreline doesn't look great on Cassio, and he certainly didn't have ideal moments in this game. And I'll say it, honestly, I think the Cassio matchup into Tristana is super overrated. Trist is way better than Cassio in the early game, and that's really why you're picking Cassio, right? Is to shut down Tristana, to stop her from being able to leap with the grounded effect, and really try to make her job a lot harder. And we'll talk about Arya. He did not play well in this game, but I don't really like this matchup for Cassio. I think Triss can just leave lane and just still continue to dominate, especially in the mid game. But, credit to Nuke. I think he played this out great. I think that his scoreline is certainly not indicative of how good he was, and his mechanics are fantastic. Cassio, another one of these European champions that the LEC plays a lot more than other regions. Crowny and Labrov continue to struggle in lane and then continue to dominate out of lane. The pentakill, I guess, count that is going on at Worlds has certainly kind of determined itself now with another one here in this game for Crowny, but I don't know. I'm still not sold on this bot lane. I know their score lines look awesome, but the top side played a lot better than they did this game, and I think they really struggled in a lane phase that they really should not struggle in at all. Crownie and Labrov should dominate this bot lane. Zaya Rakan is awesome into Kai'Sa, and specifically with the Blitzcrank, there's really not a great option here. Yes, you can hook the Zaya, and you can put yourself in a better position that way, but you're not really going to be able to do that. I think that's your weak lane if you're DFM here, your lane that you kind of designated as the scaling lane, and that's the one that ended up winning for DFM. Crownie and Labrov, not ideal. I know the scorelines, again, look great. Labrov, I think, was better, but Crownie, I think I'm concerned about in terms of his early laning. But again, he was an awesome team fighter in this game, and so just kind of some give and take, if you will, from BDS. But the top side is so good. Right now, Adam and Sheo in particular are playing so well for BDS that I'm really not super concerned. They move on to face CFO now in another best of 3. That is a series that they should be able to take as well. We'll talk about that at the end of this video, but credit to them. They played really well in this, series that they should have played well in. And then for DFM on the other side, they just aren't good enough. Like I said, I actually really like this draft. I think it actually plays into a lot of the principles that I've talked about, picking a lot of lanes that I think actually kind of dominate. Like, as much as I like Jax, Poppy destroys him. Like, Poppy, there's not a top laner that shuts down Jax harder than Poppy, in my opinion. It's a really good matchup, and Apamem was just worse as a player, couldn't play it. He's going to be my dud of the game. Again, like I said, I don't want to criticize him too hard because he really shouldn't have been in this position in the first place, but he was in this position, and he didn't necessarily make it look all that good, so it is definitely something worth at least pointing out. Aria played really bad, especially down the stretch on Tristana. I really like Trist in this game in particular because BDS doesn't really have a ton of great answers in the early game to her just like trying to find fights constantly and trying to play really active and fast. Vi doesn't really do a great job of staying on Trist in the early game, and obviously Trist can buffer a lot of stuff in the late game as well, and so I like the idea, but Aria, I think, was just a little bit too over-eager, maybe feeling some of the pressure of the final game at Worlds. Steel was fine on the Ivern, but he's basically a complete non-factor. I've been seeing some people talk about how, and I'll kind of get to this, I guess, now, how DFM is not the worst team at Worlds, how R7 was clearly worse, and maybe I'm just biased because of the domestic performances that I saw. I'm very willing to say that that is a possibility, but I just don't see how you could look at the performances from R7 against much better teams and say that they were significantly worse than DFM, who at no point at this tournament showed any ability to control the early, mid, or late game. I think DFM was clearly worse. I get that everybody wants to shit on R7, but I don't think the DFM was better than R7. I don't think that's a fair thing to say. And I think Steel is a big part of that. Steel was the worst player at this tournament. I think that that is pretty clear, in my opinion. He just did nothing in any of the 4 games that he played. He was a complete non-factor. And then Utapon and Harp, at least they won lane in a lane that they shouldn't win, but again, by the time that they got to the part where they actually got to teamfight and where Kai'Sa could actually get strong, the game had scaled out to the point where they couldn't win anymore. A lot of the scaling pieces on BDS had won early, specifically the Jax, and there really just isn't a lot you can do to play into that. So for DFM, I do think that they are okay, right? Like, there were a couple of good moments, but for the most part, in all 4 games, they were just not good. They were not competitive. They were not active. They weren't trying to do much. And, just saying that, I think that, a lot of people are going to overrate maybe their performance based on the perception of this team and the perception of this region, but I think the LJL is in a really bad spot by the end of 2023. Not to say they can't turn it around, but I think this was indicative of a pretty bad year for the region, and unfortunately, I think that's just going to be what 2023 is remembered as for Japanese League of Legends fans. Hopefully they can turn it around next year. I have full faith that they're going to be able to do that with their fan base. But for BDS, congratulations. You should be moving on, and you are moving on. You're now going to have to win one more best of 3 to get yourself into a tough best of 5 situation. And, you're probably not wanting to, put yourself in any more vulnerable spots, but you can't take your foot off the gas. Every single series from this point onwards for you is an elimination series, and this was just step 1 of the plan to get out of groups. Alright, but that is going to do it for my Worlds 2023 Play-Ins Day 4 overview and analysis video. We know our first 2 teams eliminated, Rainbow 7 on the A side, DFM on the B side. Certainly unfortunate for both of those teams, but not entirely unexpected. R7 was predicted, DFM was not predicted in mine. Actually, I think they were. I can't actually remember who I had TW over or DFM. TW I had lower on the totem pole, but DFM makes a lot of sense to go out as the first team on that side of the bracket. We are down to our final 6. Of course, we're going to quickly preview the matchups that we're going to have in lower bracket here today, starting with the A bracket, Loud versus GAM, a rematch in round number 1, or from round number 1, I should say, and in that one, Loud was definitely the better team. It's hard to believe that it's definitely going to go any other way, especially with Slater still showing a lot of the concerns that kind of got him into trouble in that series in the first place, but Loud also showed a lot of their weaknesses in the series against PSG. They're really bad at playing from behind. If you do get in a circumstance where you perhaps get an early game draft on the side of GAM that you can, kind of push like you did in Game 1 against R7, I could see a circumstance where Loud just kind of capitulates and folds and doesn't really fight back all that much. And, if that happens twice in a best of 3, then that's your series, right? And so I can see a world in which GAM does have a much better time against Loud in this series, but it's just hard to predict Loud not being able to advance again. I think their team is more consistent. I think they're more talented at the moment. But again, GAM's topside is awesome. If Robo, has a poor series, which he hasn't had, if Kiaya can get online, I could see that as an avenue for GAM to move forward, but I would predict Loud very slightly. I think I'm going to predict this closer than a lot of other people would. And then for CFO versus BDS, again, this should not be close. BDS should be the better team here. I'm going to predict them in a 2-0 because really, at the end of the day, this shouldn't be close. As much as I'm hyping up the PCS, I still have question marks about CFO, and I'm still really not sold on them as a very good team, especially after that series against Wales, where they struggled with a lot of the things that we knew they would struggle with. Their main players, specifically, their bot lane, just didn't really show up in that series, and I think that's definitely a concern. But around the map, they just haven't exactly been explosive, basically in any area, in any aspect. They were able to take down DFM in an easy series because I just don't rate DFM that high, but once things, started to get tough against TW, they just, again, kind of folded. They weren't really particularly good, and so I'm not high on CFO at all. I think BDS should be the team to get out of this side of the bracket and end up taking on PSG, but either way, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Very interesting series coming in tomorrow, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Who do you think is going to be moving on, and what do you think of the best of 5 possibilities? Who do you think is going to be making it out of the play-in stage? Would love to know your thoughts on that. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and of course, it does help this video get out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We posted about Worlds every single day on this channel, and we're going to continue to do so over the course of the entire tournament. And so if you liked this video, if you enjoyed the way that I do, analysis and go in depth on a lot of these games, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when these videos go live basically every single day for the rest of the month. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all